I haven't thought about shipping the characters from the first Nancy Drew Dossier game. To be honest, I rarely think about these characters, ever. I just don't find them very interesting. George Jackson is probably the worst out of the bunch. If they had to cut a character from the game, he would be the one I'd pick. He's Australian and wears a hat. That's basically it for his personality. He is not a well developed character. He likes a drink called the Rattlesnake. He's mad because Eda doesn't want to do a scene with a snake. He secretly takes pictures of Eda's shoulder because he thinks she's cursed. In the bad ending, he's happy that Arthur lost money when the movie flopped. So he's kind of vindictive, also kind of stupid to not realize such a huge failure will ruin his own career. I guess the mean side is sort of similar to Dwayne Powers and Simone Mueller, who are both casting agents. They might have interacted with George at one point. He might have interacted with Curie or Patrick from the Shattered Medallion, because New Zealand is pretty close to Australia. I could see George's directing career tanking to the point where the best job he can get is working on one of Curie's trashy TV shows. I think I'll go with that story. George's career falling to pieces is kind of interesting. More interesting than anything he does in this game. Eda Brooks is another not-so-great character. She's basically a discount version of Laurie Gerard from Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. In that game, Charlena said Laurie could be in movies. Well, Eda's sort of what Laurie would be like if she was in the movies. Eda's stupid. She's really stupid. That's her personality. She occasionally bosses you around. She's a little self-centered and vain, but I get the sense she's too stupid to be truly selfish and nasty. She's not saying mean things because she's mean-spirited. She's just too dumb to know how other people will interpret her statements. She must be somewhat good at acting if she has the starring role in a blockbuster movie, or maybe she got the job based on her looks. The ending proves she's a bit smarter and more manipulative than she gets credit for, but she's still pretty stupid. She sets off a lot of bombs in unstable caves, after all. Would she work with George Jackson? No, she thinks he's a creepy stalker. Would she work with Arthur? No, she also thinks he's creepy. She probably thinks Molly's creepy too. There is no love lost between Eda and anyone else who's working on the movie. I'm tempted to say Laurie Gerard because Eda acts like Laurie, but I'm going with Eda Brooks and Brady Armstrong from the final scene. She and Brady deserve each other. Their relationship would be kind of fun to see. Arthur Hitchens is financing the movie. He plans to open a theme park. He's sort of manipulative. He forced George to take the job at low pay. He causes a bunch of accidents for publicity, and he brings Nancy here on false pretenses to find some lost footage. Then again, Arthur openly admits these things. He's not keeping them a secret, so he's less manipulative than he could be. He's pretty nice to Nancy at all times, even when he's upset about other things. I like Arthur as a person. He seems like the friendliest character, the one who's most likely to be your friend in real life and least likely to start screaming at you. There's a scene where he and Molly talk with each other in the hotel lobby. This is the only scene in the game where two characters talk to each other, outside of that big confrontation scene. Maybe that's why I'm having a hard time seeing these characters in relationships with each other. They don't interact! Arthur and Molly are sort of equals, since they both know Nancy's a detective and they're both in charge of the movie. They're definitely the bosses in the situation, the other two are employees. I'm gonna go with Arthur and Molly as a couple. That's the only pairing in this game which I could see as successful. Any pairing with Eda would be a disaster, and George is too boring to be a romance star. Molly McKenna. She's an okay character. She's a no-nonsense person who's working with a bunch of weirdos under a tight deadline. She gives off the impression she's annoyed at all times, but she also seems to care about the production and the other characters. She adopts the black cat at the end of the game, which is nice. I guess she could be paired with George. They don't interact in the game, so it's hard to tell how they'd get along. They probably have lots of meetings together as producer and director. While George is mad at the production staff, he directs all his anger at Arthur, not Molly. So maybe he likes her? There's a similar lack of information on her side. We don't know how she feels about George. She never says. Maybe she doesn't feel too strongly about him. Molly is somewhat similar to Nick Blesky, the no-nonsense boss from the second Dossier game, but she's way nicer than Nick. I don't want to pair her with Nick. She doesn't deserve that. As I said earlier, I'm going with Molly McKenna and Arthur Hitchens, the only two characters who have an actual conversation in this game. Nancy Drew. Can I skip this? Nobody in the game would be a good date for Nancy. Maybe Molly, but Nancy's not into women. Arthur's too old for her, and George might be okay if he wasn't so boring. I'm guessing the internet will pair Nancy with him due to the lack of other viable options. As for me, I pair Nancy Drew with no one. All the other characters in the game are background characters. Most of them don't have names. I get the sense that Lois Mason and Z.B. Collingwood had a relationship back when the original movie was filmed. He helped Lois fake her death for reasons that aren't fully explained. Nancy thinks Lois might have been a secret government spy. Lois faking her own death could be an interesting story. I would rather read that than read about any of the other characters in this game. But that's basically it for the secondary characters, so there's none to speak of. To recap, here are my choices. George Jackson with Kieran Ind, Eda Brooks with Brady Armstrong, Arthur Hitchens with Molly McKenna with Arthur Hitchens, Nancy Drew with no one. Let's see what the internet has to say. George Jackson with Eda Brooks and Nancy Drew. Eda Brooks with Molly McKenna and none. None got over twice as many votes as Molly. Arthur Hitchens is almost tied with Molly and Eda, but then none gets far more votes. Molly McKenna with George and Nancy. Nancy Drew with George and Molly, although none is pretty close. So Molly and Nancy are the closest thing we get to a most popular couple in this game. The polls did not get as many votes as usual. I guess I'm not the only one who finds the characters kind of boring.